But it's lovely to have you here for the Worldwide Missionary Convention. Just to begin, tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll start with you, Malcolm.
I'm from Glasgow in Scotland. My father worked in just a foundry. Brought up in a working class family, studied architecture, and just had a real passion for buildings and for design. Yeah.
And Liz.
Well, one thing you've seen about me already is I'm too old to be sitting on a bar stool this size. I'm also from Scotland, from the West Coast, studied in Glasgow, studied music, and if I had my option tonight, I would spend the rest of the evening listening to these wonderful, wonderful things. Thank you, that was just wonderful. So both of us grew up in Christian homes, for which we're very grateful, and I love to sing, I love to read, and I love to potter in my little balcony pots. I love people and God's people around the world, and I think the thing we enjoy most is sitting around our dining room table, just talking to people about the Lord and about the scriptures and about what God might want to do with their lives.
And we're going to delve in tonight to a bit of your own personal story. But before we do that, just tell us, how did you meet and how long have you been married?
Oh, I think you better answer this, Liz.
We do agree on it, but Malcolm doesn't always remember. Because we met when we were 5. And
you folks didn't realize that we have arranged marriages in Scotland. Yeah.
Our fathers were both passionately involved in youth ministry, and we were in the same denomination, living in towns about 10 or 12 miles apart, and our fathers got together for a children's event, and my family were invited to go to Malcolm's home, and I remember this little boy of 5. We were both 5, and so, yeah, that's when we met. Now,
love at first sight, was it?
He does say he remembers the second time we met.
I do remember the second time when we were 19. Yeah, right. That's very vivid.
Yes. And then, when were you married?
We were married when we were 22. I had finished I was teaching high school music, and Malcolm was going on to a postgraduate in architecture. So we were married in 1975. No, 72.
Yeah.
And, 1972.
And you, I know, went overseas, but during that period, you then began to feel a pull towards missionary service. How did that come about, Malcolm?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was saying this morning in our little taster that we had a God-given sense of adventure, and we headed off to Africa in 1975 for me to be an architect in Nigeria, Liz as a musician teaching music, and really that was we had a God-given sense of adventure. But then God began to work with us in Nigeria, bringing people into our lives, bringing some tough situations that we had to deal with, and through a number of areas of people speaking into our lives, we actually then moved into mission work. We actually eventually went in 1985 to Ethiopia during the 84-85 famine to work there with SIM. So that sort of officially began our mission work. But I suppose God from 75 was doing a lot of preparation in our lives through some of the tough things that we went through. Yeah.
And I know too, Liz, in those early years, you did have some personal struggles that actually in many ways could have brought you back from serving overseas, but actually didn't in the end. Tell us a little bit about that. What? Yeah.
Yes, we did. Malcolm and I don't have any children of our own, and I had 2 ectopic pregnancies, and one of them I had to have surgery in a tiny little Catholic mission hospital in the north of Nigeria. And that was a very, very difficult time for us. I look back now on some of the hard things that happened and realize that it has helped us over the years, as we've looked back on hard things in our own lives, to be able to identify a little bit with other people who have gone through things. And so having no children was a point in our lives. We were very successful in Malcolm's business. We loved our life. We were beginning to travel the world. We had a lot that we could have been, I guess, angry with God. We could have turned our back on our faith. But I look back now and see that God was using these hard things to confirm in us, was He first in our lives. And I look back and see that has helped me, helped both of us to help other people in hard situations.
Yeah, it was a real struggle, David, at that time. I mean, I was actually memorizing Philippians 3:7 and 8. Whatever was to my profit, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. And let me tell you, at that time, that verse didn't do me a lot of good. Because I was, I think we were angry with God, and God had to take us through some weeks of wrestling with Him to actually look at our future and say, where do we place our future? And as we stood at that crossroads, do we head off in the direction that we felt was, maybe others would say, well, this will be a prosperous career for you? Or do we say, God, what do you want us to do? And we said, no, we have to lay ourselves before the Lord. Yeah.
And that, as you said a few moments ago, took you into Ethiopia. And this week we've been hearing about Christian workers in Afghanistan and having to be evacuated from the country because of the current situation there. And one of the folk who was speaking a few nights ago talked about the struggle that many of them felt with the tension. Should I stay? Should I go? Now, you, I know, had an experience like that whenever you were in Ethiopia.
We did. I mean, we lived in Ethiopia during the Marxist time, and there was a civil war going on the whole time we were there. The troops of the Ethiopian People Revolutionary Democratic Front were in the north of the country, and for years they were slowly working their way south. It took a long time, but in 1991 things began to disintegrate in the central government in Addis Ababa. And SIM, the organization we were with, had evacuated some people, and we were still there at that time. And I remember it was a Sunday morning in early May 1991, and there had been a lot of gunfire around us that night. We had a lot of gunfire in the city at that time. And the phone rang at 6:30. It was in the morning. We were awake because of the gunfire. And it was our director, Dr. Bruce Adams, saying, Malcolm, we've heard that the EPRDF are on the outside of Addis Ababa. They're going to take the city. It looks like either tomorrow, Monday, or certainly Tuesday, they'll be in the city and taking it. The troops of the government are disintegrating. The last flight is leaving this afternoon. A Lufthansa flight to Frankfurt. There's a seat on it for Liz. Would you like me to reserve it for her? And I thought immediately about Liz's mum at home and others at home. And I said, yes, reserve that seat. And I put the phone down and I looked to Liz and I looked her in the eye and I said, Liz, I think I made the wrong decision. And we talked about it and we both agreed that we should stay together through this. And I phoned Dr. Adams back immediately and said, Dr. Adams, give the seat to someone else. We're staying here. And just sort of backing up on that, when we left Ethiopia in 1996, we were involved in a discipleship ministry with students and young people. And we had an amazing time. I mean, we're still investing in these lives today. And some of them struggling just now, actually, with this current tensions in Ethiopia. But we went outside of Addis for a conference before we left, and they had organized it. We want to bless you before you go. I was coming to be the SIM UK North Europe director, and people were giving testimonies about all the things that we had contributed to them over the 11 years. And one of them, Kifley Barhano, said to us, you've done amazing things. You've introduced us to Christ. You've taught us. You've trained us. You've brought people in to teach us. And he said, you've done amazing things with us. But he said, the most important thing you did for us, he said, you stayed with us during the darkest times. And we could only have done that, I think, because we didn't have a family. If we'd had children, I think Liz would have been out of before then. But we felt it was really important that we remained there and journeyed through some of the aftermath of the takeover of the EPRDF and what that meant. Yeah. So it was a tough decision, Liz. Yeah.
I should just say on that, as we've wrestled this week, thinking about Ethiopia, and which we know and love very well, although we don't know Afghanistan, we could never, on the basis of our decision, know what is right for other people. Each one of us has a different situation, and we are responsible to the Lord for that decision. What it did teach us was to again have that understanding of the tremendous sense of tension and pooling when you think of your family at home, but you think of the people that God's called you to. When you think of what could happen and where you could go to safety. Nobody should make that decision for other people until they're in that situation with the Lord. But we are grateful that we had to go through it. One thing I would just say in this is that as that drama was unfolding, we were given the opportunity just to pick up a few things, and we had lived for about 2 years with a suitcase, a little case by the door, with everything we needed to run. So we had lived like that for quite a while, knowing that we could, and we even always had extra fuel for the car. But in that last moment, and you will excuse me if I become emotional, it still touches me deeply. I looked around everything in my home, and the only thing I could think of that I wanted to take was a little notebook like this. We didn't have phones in those days where we had all our information on our phone. I had all the Ethiopian students' telephone numbers in a book like this. And that was all I wanted to take, because I needed to be able to keep in touch with the people that were on my heart. And that's what our missionaries today in Afghanistan are facing. It's very hard, very hard.
You came through that hard time, and Malcolm mentioned how you then were coming back from Ethiopia to take up a new role as initially UK Europe Director and then the International Director of SIM. Now, how did that differ from being on the field, and what particular challenges, because you were so invested obviously in those people in Ethiopia, and here you were in this very different kind of role?
Yeah, it was a major leadership role. I mean, SIM today has 4,000 people in over 70 countries around the world. It was a huge responsibility and a huge annual budget to fund these missionaries and projects, and it was a huge responsibility. I think looking back, I go back to my training as an architect, and all of the different things that you've got to do to pull the building together. And I think one of the things I sort of learned about leadership was that there's basically one thing you need to know and one thing you need to be able to do. And the thing you need to know, and know this really right in your heart, is you cannot do this yourself. You can't do this yourself. And then the thing you need to really begin to do is build teams of people, teams that are better than yourself, and inspire them. And so I think, as I look back, I think my training as an architect and how an architect has to work now, sometimes there's tensions between architects and engineers and others that are working on buildings. But out of that, I think I saw a lot of lessons I learned that took into leadership. I think it was great significance. Yeah.
The other thing, obviously, that came then at the end of your time of leadership was handing on to a successor.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to visit some SIM missionaries in Charlotte a few years ago, and they are based at the headquarters there. And I got to meet your successor, Dr. Joshua Bokonjoko, who was actually then here a couple of years ago at the convention. How did his appointment come about?
Well, that was, one of the things that we're passionate about discipleship, but we're also passionate about diversity. God is at work in all cultures around the world. He's at work in amazing ways. And SIM was an organization 125 years old. And organizations need to keep being renewed, need to keep being envisioned, need to refound their values. And as I thought about what God is doing around the world and the spiritual vitality in these leaders and churches around the world, I said that energy needs to come into SIM. And so one of the first things I did with the leadership team that I was given from Dr. Jim Pludum, I actually asked them all to resign. And they did. They said, we will resign. I said to them, I want to build a new leadership team. I want to build it from people from different parts of the world. We need to draw that energy into the team. So we had Joshua from Nigeria, Andrew Ng from Singapore, a Chinese, Dave Bremner from South Africa, a Latin American, Rennie Palacio from Cuba as our finance officer, and there was Dorothy Hale, a lady from the UK, our personnel person. And I said, we need a younger team, and because this team was all older than myself, and I said that we need that team to move forward. And I believe that energy that they brought from their different cultural backgrounds, working in partnership and teamwork together, became a great driving force for us moving forward. Yeah.
Now, in a few moments,
I recruited Joshua he was working in a hospital in the Niger Republic in the Sahara Desert. And this was a hospital that we had lots of problems with. Labor problems, medical problems, other things. And I began to hear about this guy who became the director of this hospital, who sorted out this problem and that problem and this problem. And so I had my eye on him, and I said, I want this guy to join my team. I got a lot of struggles from the team in Niger Republic because I took a doctor out. But actually, Joshua was there at the center of SIM fighting for resources for the hospital there as well. So they benefited from him coming. But that's another story. Yeah.
Now, in a few moments, you're going to tell us a little bit about the work of the Langham Partnership. But Liz, just as we segue into that, both of you are now involved in that. How did that come about, and what are your respective roles with Langham Partnership?
Well, by the time Malcolm had served 18 years in senior leadership in SIM, we were getting into our 60s, and it seemed like it was time to retire. But we didn't feel like we were ready to retire, so we began to we knew it was time to hand over, and we felt that Joshua was the right person. But what were we going to do next? So we had traveled the world for 38 years, and we felt it was time to begin to put roots down again at home in Scotland. So that was clear. And then Malcolm felt that he had spent so long in leadership, and a lot of it is wonderful, but leadership is tough. And so he felt he wanted to go back into frontline ministry, coalface ministry. And he hadn't really served in a big city church. And so he was thinking about working in a church in Edinburgh, and an opportunity came up for that to happen. And I just really wasn't sure what I would do next, but I knew we were going home to Scotland. But we had connections with the Langham Partnership. SIM and Langham had worked closely together on envisioning and the start of the Bible commentaries. Malcolm will tell you a little bit about that later. And through that, we had friends who were both involved in SIM and in Langham. And Dr. Chris Wright, that some of you will know, contacted me and asked if I would be interested to join the Langham Partnership. And he explained the role was to invest in international scholars who were coming to Britain to study for their PhDs in theology or church history. And I don't have a PhD in theology, and so I felt quite intimidated. And then he made it even harder by saying that it was really to follow on the footsteps of John Stott. Well, that really was enough to say, no, this is not for me. But what he meant was that when scholars come to study in this country, they have all the help that they need from their supervisors, their universities, but sometimes they struggle spiritually, especially if they're in a secular university. And so John Stott had spent a lot of time inviting them to his home, calling them, visiting them, spending time with them, asking them hard questions, finding out about their lives. And so Chris said that they felt that this needed to be picked up on again. Would I be interested in doing this? So I started that role at the beginning of 2014. And Malcolm eventually, after spending 4 years in the church, also joined me in Langham. So that's what we do. It's a wonderful role. We have the privilege of bringing all of our years of travel around the world, understanding of cultures and interest in people. We get to work with the most amazing people here coming to British universities under Langham Scholarships.